Hey everyone, so today I wanted to cover personas and journey maps with today's webinar, and this is part of our weekly UX workshop series covering the fundamentals of UX design. So let's just jump into it. First, I wanted to just mention briefly that I do have a Patreon now, so if you are someone that is going to be consistently coming every week, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time to these webinars, I do recommend signing up on Patreon. You'll save a whole bunch of money on general admission tickets. I do always give away a couple of free tickets every week, but those aren't guaranteed. And so this is just a way you can support me, support what I'm doing, and also make sure you get access to all of these webinars and a lot of more free content. I have an ebook on there, all sorts of things like that. So today's agenda is pretty simple. We'll be covering two main topics, the first of which is flow models and journey maps, and the second part of which is personas. So we return to this UX design lifecycle image pretty much every week at this point because it's a good fundamental way to understand at what point in the UX design process that we are. And so we're still in this understanding needs section of our UX design lifecycle. And so if you haven't seen the UX design lifecycle before, basically the whole concept is that you will first seek to understand the needs of your users. You will then design solutions based on your understanding of those needs. From the design phase, you will go into prototyping mode and creating some actual prototypes from your designs. And then the last piece of the puzzle is evaluating those designs, getting verification from your stakeholders and your users that the design is good, that the prototypes work, and then figuring out what's good and bad or what needs to be refined from that work. Beyond that, you're going to, sorry, someone knocked on my door. I think it's okay. So once you have evaluated your UX needs, you're going to then move back into understanding the needs again. So understanding what worked and what didn't work about your prototypes, and then you're going to repeat the cycle again. And so that's the whole idea behind the UX design lifecycle. And we're going to be focusing on part of this understanding needs category. This is kind of the four components of that understanding needs category. And so we have data elicitation, data analysis, and data modeling, which is the section we're in now. I have presentations on elicitation, which just means gathering the data, maybe going to the client site, doing user interviews, that sort of thing. Data analysis, so actually breaking down your notes in a concise and clear way. And then data modeling is actually taking that data that you have analyzed and putting it into models or images that can capture the essence, the meaning of your data. These are great tools to use for communication, mostly to develop a clear understanding between team members, between designers, and with stakeholders to just communicate your overall goals, your overall understanding of the system, and your goals for your designs moving forward. And then in a future webinar, we will cover user needs and requirements, which is important before we actually get into the design part of our life cycle. So journey maps. Journey maps are a synthetic representation that describes step-by-step how a user interacts with a service. I'm just going to make sure real quick that I am in fact recording. Okay, good. The process is mapped from the user perspective, describing what happens at each stage of the interaction, what touch points are involved, and what obstacles and barriers they may encounter. But first, I want to cover flow models, because the flow model is a simple graphical representation of how information on artifacts flow through the system as it is used. Journey maps is a buzzword you hear a lot in UX literature, but I would actually recommend first starting with a more general flow model of the product or system you are working on before working on something that gets really specific, like a journey map. A flow model is something every project needs. So you'll be able to use this kind of model for any project virtually that you might have. A flow model is great for just trying to understand the product or system you're working on. So I'm going to go through a series of slides now that are just going to take your flow model and kind of build on top of it so I can show you how you might go about creating one. So in this example, we'd be drawing a flow model for a theater ticket system. So starting very early in the UX lifecycle, you'll want to draw this system as a graph of nodes and arcs. You'll start by drawing little people icons labeled with their work roles as nodes. So in this case, we have the theater as our main circle. We also have our event manager and our ticket sellers, and we've labeled both of those user work roles. We also want to include roles external to the organization. So we're not just thinking about the people that are in the theater, that are working inside the theater, but the people that are external to the organization that still have an impact on our product or system. So our customers and our event sponsors. We also want to add nodes for other entities that are not people, such as the database into which and from which anything related to the work practice can flow. So here we have our ticket database and our event database in our ticket station. The next step is to start adding arrows. So we're going to draw arrows representing flow, communication, and coordination necessary to do work between our nodes. So between our people and between our things like databases. You'll want to label each of these arrows so you understand what is flowing, such as artifacts or information, and by what medium. So by email, by phone, letters, memos, meetings, whatever that medium of communication is going through each of these arrows. So in this next slide, we have kind of an addition to our user flow. So this is a pretty basic user flow. This is a great first step, but as we learn more about our product or system, we'll get to something that looks a little bit more full like this. So we're considering things that might not be kind of our core understanding of what the theater is, but we also want to include, you know, not just the in-person ticket system, but also the online ticket system. So we want to add here the online ticket source that is partnering with our theater, buyticketsnow.com. That might be another way that a ticket buyer browses and buys their tickets. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Eventually, our flow model will be pretty robust. We want to include roles that are not directly involved with ticket buying, such as friends or family. You can see that up here, communicating with the ticket buyer about their choices of shows, dates, seats, and prices. This flow model does a couple of really great things. It shows communications between all of these different moving parts, and it also shows the coordination necessary to get work done. So that's what is really valuable about this visualization here. It's not the most beautiful and it doesn't need to be. It just needs to show all of the different ways that communication flows as well as artifacts and all the coordination that we need to get work done. So we're thinking about things like advertising, finances, online sources, things like that. So I also wanted to definitely cover the journey map because I know this is such a UX buzzword, although I do think that the flow model is perhaps more important than the actual journey map, but the journey map still has some pretty good uses. So the customer journey map is a kind of flow model. It is a specific activity model for a different kind of flow and usage. It's a map of how customer or user experiences a product or system over time and through space. It is definitely an ecological view of user experience and can often involve pervasive information architecture. The customer or the user passes through and interacts with the system over time and through space. So the map tells a story of usage to clients and helps UX designers understand their special work practice and needs. So if we go back to our flow model, we're really taking one person, such as the event manager or our ticket buyer, and we're tracking the journey of that specific person. So you're really taking something like the ticket buyer and you're considering all of these arrows that are pointing towards them, and you're taking their experience and you're focusing in on them. So you could potentially have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish journey maps for this specific scenario. And that's if we take all of the users and try and track all of their journeys throughout the theater ecosystem, if you will. So on this example from NielsenNormanGroup.com, I have this kind of outline of a typical customer or user journey map. You're going to have your specific user on top and their goals. You're going to have all the different phases of their process. So maybe the pre-buying ticket phase where they're talking to their friends and family, and then the actual ticket buying process, and then maybe actually the experience of going to that event. Maybe you want to include that as well. So those are kind of that's kind of our outline for our user journey map. Here is kind of the journey map a little more filled in, also again from Nielsen Norman Group. And journey mapping is a process that provides a holistic view of the customer experience by uncovering moments of both frustration and delight through a series of interactions. Done successfully, it reveals opportunities to adjust customers' pain points, alleviate fragmentation, and ultimately create a better experience for your users. So this can be good if, for example, you know your stakeholder is very, very concerned about the experience of a particular user, such as in our theater situation, if your stakeholder is really wanting the designers to focus on what is the customer's experience, what is the ticket buyer's experience, maybe that's the most important piece to them. Something like a journey map can really highlight the frustrations and the moments of delight within your already existing process, and where you're going to decide to focus your designs to kind of lift those moments of frustration up so that they're experiencing delight throughout the whole process. So you can include things like opportunities. Opportunities is going to give you a clear idea, a clear direction for your design. So in this example, we're talking about switching mobile plans. So comparing alternate companies' offers for her, breaking down current plan into dollar amounts, customer support via text messaging and chat. Those are all ideas for features or design ideas to incorporate into Jamie's experience with the switching mobile plan experience. You'll also be able to boil down, okay, what are their expectations? What do they want out of the system? So the part about expectations is really important, and you get that information a lot of times from just user interviews, web analytics, that sort of thing. And then you have the actual map part, which actually illustrates the actual details of, okay, this part of the system I like, this part I don't, and it gives you a good indicator of where we need to focus our designs. And we also want to definitely touch on metrics. So we want to make sure that we are figuring out where we're going to start tracking things so that we can make sure our plans are working, and how we're going to qualitatively or quantitatively track what part of our designs are working. So that's the journey map in a nutshell. Next, I wanted to definitely cover personas, because this is a very popular subject within the UX design community. Personas are archetypal users whose goals and characteristics represent the needs of a larger group of users. So this could be a 1 to 2 page description, which includes behavior patterns, goals, skills, attitudes, and background information, as well as the environment in which a persona operates. So persona research, how do we actually go about researching for a persona? Well, I've already talked in depth about persona research in previous webinars, but just to recap, there are lots of ways that we can collect information to help guide our persona making process. We're going to want to collect information by using what we have on hand, things like web analytics, if we have them, studying the reviews of our product or system online, if those are available to us. We also want to do things like try to conduct interviews with the users. That can be really helpful. So all of these different modalities can help us collect a picture of what our typical user looks like. and the more data points, better. So demographics. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you're trying to craft our persona is we're going to want to give this person a name. And the name allows us to just create this person as if they are a real person. This is a little bit debated because I think that this gets a little too designery for a lot of people because it's a little artsy, you know, we're making up this fake person. But I do think it helps to put a name to the person and actually say, hey, we're not just designing for this abstract person in our head, we're designing for Katie Morrison, we're designing for Kinsley Fink, we're designing for Lucy Walker. Like, these are real people that we're designing for. And it really puts the user at the center of our user experience goals. So UiFace is a great platform. It's free online. You can do things like generate a bunch of headshots to use for your personas as well as names. Personally, I like to use illustrations for my personas instead of stock photos, just because I think that it erases the possibility that you might be stereotyping. You don't necessarily want to, you know, stereotype things like skin color or age. That might lead to some kind of weird conversations with stakeholders. You just want to make sure that you are not, again, stereotyping about the kind of user that is using your site. This is meant to be a tool that helps you have a real human connection with who you're speaking to, but I think that an illustration kind of gets that point across just fine. So that's kind of the reason I use illustrations. Again, using a name is really great, just to kind of, again, make this more realistic. You'll want to also use things like, you know, marital status, job, income, residence. You can use all of these details to really craft the image of this person in your head. So here's an example of a persona. They used a stock image, but I still think that this, I got this, where did I get this? I got this from UXpressa, and I included the website name at the on the last slide of this presentation. But I thought this was a good example of a user persona. They have provided with us a name, a picture, the job title, their gender, their age, their marital status, their location. This might all be relevant information for us to know about our user. We're also giving them a background information. So just a little short list. It can be bulleted, just a couple of short sentences about who they are and what they are using the system for. We want to avoid unnecessary information that might cause cluttering and confusion, but we do like to include some detail here because it might lead us to some really wonderful insights later on. So I honestly recommend just writing down a ton of stuff and then hacking away at it later and figuring out, okay, let's pare this down into the essentials. But I think that the best way to design a persona is to first go overboard and then cut back. I think that helps a lot more than trying to figure out in our heads, you know, what's the most specific information in this instance. So here we've added goals to our persona. Defining persona goals is really important because it allows you to see how your goals align with the goals of your customers. And it helps you meet the goals of your customers' needs better. Here we have added finding what motivates and frustrates your customers, which is something that's really important to include with personas, maybe the most important. And this actually helps you, you can start to link your personas with your journey maps because those moments of frustration and delight are kind of mimicked here with the motivations and frustrations. And so we're going to want to include all of his pain points. You know, he doesn't, in this case, John doesn't want to spend too much time learning the ropes of a tool. He wants a balanced price to value ratio. Under the motivations category, he is looking for some sort of automation to his routine operations, and he'd love to see if he could store his works in one place so that he can access them from any computer. So as you can see, personas can get quite lengthy. I think that this is a great basic persona a great first draft, but there is some value in adding some more stuff to this. And I think that this really adding more beyond these couple of items really is going to depend on your specific project. So in the case of John, our UX designer, we might want to include something like a quote. We might think that it is important to add a couple of his skills, how good he is with visualization, design thinking, empathy, all the things that might relate to the tool that we have in mind for John, that we're trying to create for John. Technology, how comfortable is he with technology? What devices does he own and use? What softwares does he have? That sort of thing. So there are a lot of things you can add to your persona. I think that this is a good baseline, and then this is a good expansion. So I think that this is a really great example of a well-crafted persona, but definitely something that is tailorable towards your audience, because you want to keep in mind that this, what are you using the persona for? Is it for communication among your team members? Is it for use with the stakeholders? Because the way you might design your persona might differ if you are just using it internally with your team versus actually presenting this information to your stakeholder. Your stakeholder might be more focused on the motivations and frustration aspects, while as your team might be more interested in the holistic view of the user. So that's just an example of how you might tailor it to fit whoever is going to be looking at your personas. But yeah, I think it's a really valuable tool. I think that all of the three things we've talked about today, flow models, journey maps, and personas, are all really great, valuable tools. But that concludes my presentation today. I hope that it was helpful to you all. I'd love to hear your questions and your feedback. Please provide them in the chat box, but I'm going to end the recording now.